All right, clean freaks, we are here in the final session of Lost in Space, and you may have wondered at the beginning of this conference, how are they going to have an entire conference on one little specific topic of missing instruments? Well, hopefully we've convinced you, but if we haven't convinced you yet, this panel discussion as we wrap is going to bring you across the finish line and say, you know what, that topic, as small as it appeared on the surface, was actually much deeper and wider, and so many implications that flow out of it. And one of those implications is the topic of tray optimization. And so we have brought together an all-star panel today to wrap us on this topic. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of angles, like why and what is it, and how do we get there, and what are the challenges along the way. But you didn't tune in to hear any more from me today. You tuned in probably to hear our panelists. So let's start with a quick round of introductions. Maybe Jardine, if you can kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe let's answer how you got into sterile processing career to begin with.
I initially went to a sterile processing vocational school in my area, Rochester, New York. And I came out of that and just dove right in and worked at multiple facilities and kind of began to climb up the ranks. And thus I arrived. I've kind of been everywhere and sat in every seat.
So you knew, like, you went to school, you said, this is what I want to do. What was that first exposure like? I mean, did you have friends or family in the career, or did you just stumble upon that and say, yeah, you know, it sounds like fun?
I think what initially caught my attention was just the variety of things that sterile processing offers. I knew I would not be bored.
Okay. Well, that has definitely played out, I'm sure, in the years of your career. So yeah, welcome to the panel, Jardine. Oh, what about you, Rebecca? What's your story? How'd you land in SPD?
I was working as a veterinary assistant and then a veterinary technician for many years, and had a lot of experience with the OR in veterinary medicine. And a colleague was like, you know, we can make more money and then learn how to do this in human medicine too. And so we joined a community college class, and it kind of went from there. So I've worked just like Jardine. I've done a lot of almost every position, and I'm currently a manager for Maine General in Maine, Augusta and Waterville, Maine, and I'm also the president of the Northern New England chapter of HCN.
Oh, nice! Congratulations. I think I knew that, but I had forgotten that. So yeah, congrats again. Yeah, you know, the vet space is so interesting. There is so much crossover. Even like when you reference the OR in the vet context, like my mind is like, wait, do you call it OR in the vet space too? But all of that crossover and all the things, you know, that you learned as a vet tech too for sterilization side is such a great prep for what happens on the human side. Obviously, there's a lot more compliance or regulatory and process, but, you know, the basics are the same. We've got a patient, we got a process, and you got to get it from X or from A to Z, or it's not going to be a safe surgery. So, yeah, that's a very cool story. All right, Amanda, what about you? What's your story? How'd you get into SPD?
So, unlike the two of them, I actually went to college to be a youth pastor.
Okay.
And then decided that wasn't for me. Jumped into healthcare, being a EVS technician on night shift in the ER. Decided that I wanted to be on the back end of patient care. So I wanted to help patients, but I didn't want to be front lines. So I started sterile processing, got my certification 6 months in. Became a supervisor a year later, and now I am the educator of the West Side for University Hospitals.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I got the educators there. And, you know, your growth story, too, reminded me of an interview that we did with Jardine and Matthew Richardson a couple years ago. And the reason I bring that up, that you reminded me, that's one of the highest performing YouTube interviews on our entire Beyond Clean YouTube channel. So if you ever want to check that out, go to YouTube and search for Jardine's name and on our channel, and that'll come up, and talk about career growth. But today, it's not career growth that we're going to be referencing. We're going to be talking about tray optimization. And the title of this session, as everyone knows by now, is 100% used, addressing the missing instruments in our journey to tray optimization. And so there's a lot packed into that title. But, the biggest kind of question mark is, what do we mean when we say tray optimization? Or what do you mean? Because there may be some different definitions here. So let me come back to you first, Amanda. How would you describe that maybe to a new technician who's like, hey, like I heard you are doing some kind of tray optimization project. What is that?
So tray optimization for me is going through the trays, figuring out what gets used all the time, and then figuring out what's just in the tray for just in case.
Okay.
Removing that because that helps eliminate the cost for reprocessing.
And so I'm going to speak this back to you, and then I'm going to ask the same question here to Rebecca. So it's going through the tray. It's getting a handle on what's in there, what's supposed to be in there, and then asking the question, why is this in there, right? Is it used, or is it a just in case? And we'll maybe get into some of those nuances here later. Is that the way that you would describe it?
Yes.
Okay. What about you, Rebecca? Would you add any nuance or redefinition to that?
Yeah, so I when I first hear those terms, it makes me think of exactly what Amanda said. What you need the most, pull out the rest of the stuff, put it elsewhere, use it for different things. Less wear and tear on an instrument set or other instruments if they're used less work for SPD. But with that being said, a team member brought this up to me actually. It's the whole process, decontamination, washing, assembly without any variations in the process, as well as going through the tray. You need to make sure all of your steps are aligned.
Well, you bring up the process piece, but actually what stuck out to me in your answer, your nuance, was the redeployment of the instruments into different trays. You kind of said that offhand, but, that's a big piece of this puzzle, because if we're doing what Amanda's saying, and we're taking out things that are not needed or just in case, well, then you've got all these instruments that no longer have a dedicated home. And then, to your point, Rebecca, those can be deployed many times into other optimized trays, or not. Maybe they're not needed and not used, and we got to figure out that piece. And so we'll probably dig into that a little bit more. What about you, Jordan? Anything else to nuance this definition here up front?
Just the thought of that the surgeon has upgraded their skill level. Once upon a time, it did take all of those instruments, but at this particular time, because of the nuances and techniques, they don't need that stuff. So it reduces waste, and it also exposes their efficiency.
Wow. Yeah. I've been in this career since 2009. I have never thought about the surgeon improving in that way and the impact that it would have on the tray layout. That is really an interesting perspective. How did you come across that? Were you talking to surgeons, or is that feedback that you got from surgical techs? Like, I'm really curious how you learned that.
I often think about just the nuances in technology, and if we're getting better with technology and phones and all this digital stuff, and they're also going to conferences and learning different techniques, then just quite naturally over time, they're going to get better. So if our book said it needed 20 things, then at today's time, it shouldn't necessarily need 20 anymore.
Right. Yeah. So, now that you explain that, I guess what it also makes me think is what we traditionally see in SPD of trays with surgeons is not that they get smaller, is that they tend to add things. So you're right. They come back to a conference. They like, hey, I saw this new widget, so I want to add that to my tray. And that happens year after year after year with surgeon after surgeon after surgeon. And then we end up with the opposite of tray optimization, which is like tray overload. But yeah, it should have that impact. And maybe we'll get into how we help drive that, collaboratively with surgeons here. But I think that's a really unique takeaway, even up front here in this conversation. Let's talk about what tray optimization is not. And Rebecca, I want to come to you first on this. This phrase standardization, this came up in a conversation that we had earlier in the conference with John Rowe, talking about his journey as an instrument coordinator and, his role in kind of trying to tackle missing instruments in that role as a coordinator. But one of the things that he brought up was this term standardization, and that's a big buzzword in all of healthcare, and it can mean many things, many reasons, many applications. But when we're talking about tray inventory, instrument inventory, in the context of tray optimization, in the context of missing instruments, how would you differentiate what we've defined now for tray optimization versus what people talk about when they say like tray standardization or standardizing your inventory?
The standardization of trays to me kind of like makes me think of, like if you have multiple campuses, the trays are the same at both campuses.
Right.
There's a standard workflow or a standard set of instruments that you are going to use for a total knee procedure. Whereas your optimization might be geared more specific to a certain doctor. Right, you're pulling out what you're going to use, which may be more unique and different than your standard tray that gets used with every knee procedure, like an ortho minor set or something like that.
And even you alluded to multiple campuses, what I think is a great analogy for what that process usually is, right? Like you're looking across service lines, looking across multiple campuses, but at the bottom of it in the background, too, is you could be standardizing trays that are not optimized. And, that would be maybe an easy approach, right? If you're just looking at this and saying, okay, the minor tray has 126 instruments in it today. We're going to standardize that across all of our 11 campuses. And so every minor tray is going to have 126 instruments, and no one stopped to ask, but do they need them? Like Amanda said.
Another part of that comes in the standardization too. It goes with presentation and how you're putting things in and how the OR is getting that tray. So,
great point.
Work collaboratively with the operating room to say, get your education on the OR and the sterile procedures and how they're opening and how they set up their tables so that you and your team can better set up the trays, A, to achieve best sterility and follow your IFUs, but then B, also make it best for the OR so they can cut their time in the room setting up. That's money and that's time and it's all that stuff. But understanding that baseline education might help, putting a picture in your tracking system or a picture book if you don't have one of the retractors are going to go on this side every time. These instruments are going to lay in this position every time. Having that type of guideline also helps achieve a complete set.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's even a bit of muscle memory that you're able to develop. Yeah. So anytime your hand touches one of those Kelly retractors or Richardson retractors, it's automatically going, same place in the tray. Everyone knows, every tech is trained the same way. And you're right, the presentation impact in the operating room of constantly seeing that same setup just gives a lot of trust, to the process of it's not a surprise every time, like those little lollipops, right? It's like you don't know what flavor it's going to be. You don't know what, without standardized trays, you don't know what you're going to open here, right?
That you can tackle like service line by service line, one tray at a time per service line until you get it takes a lot of time, but it's totally worth it.
So Rebecca just brought up time, but Jardine, I want to come to a question around the who. So it's going to take a lot of time to do these things, optimizing or standardizing, and we're going to focus on the optimization piece here. But my question is, who's usually in charge of this in the sterile processing department? Or maybe we'll just kind of say in the hospital, because as we've been talking about, tray optimization impacts a lot of different teams.
So I think it has to be, typically I've known it to be kind of the service line nurse or coordinator. But lately I've seen a collaborative effort of SPD and that service line coordinator. And once that collaborative effort is created, it just works seamlessly. One of the things that Rebecca said that I really enjoy was about optimizing the trays, it being a personal thing. It's very subjective. And so if you're not considering who's using it, you could, optimize in such a way that it's not optimal. And so it has to be that collaborative effort in order for it to be successful.
Yeah, I don't know if Amanda said this earlier or not, but just talking to the surgeons, like that sounds very simple, but it's very easy to skip over to say, yeah, who's going to be using this tray at the end of the day? Like, it may be optimized the way that we wanted at SPD or standardized the way we wanted, or even, sometimes the coordinators have some preferences that don't quite transfer all the way to the surgeons they're supporting. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Jordan. Like, that's got to be a collaborative conversation from beginning to end. What about you, Amanda? Who have you seen in charge in your experience of these kinds of optimization questions and projects?
So, a great example of this is we started a robotics program at the hospital that I was the manager of sterile processing for. And we standardized our robotic trays to put arms in. So if you were doing, say, a robotic flap chole, we got all the general surgeons that were doing robotics, and we said, okay, what arms are you going to use every single case? And we've got 4 or 5 different general surgeons to use the same arms. Because as you know, the arms have X amount of lives, and then they have X amount of lives for when they're being reprocessed and not used. So that cut back on a lot of time, a lot of money, but getting everybody involved. So I was involved as far as like ordering instrumentation and speaking with the surgeons, the nurse manager, the service lead, even the surgeon, because they can tell you 5 ways to Sunday that they're going to use X, Y, and Z, but physically getting them to use it
Right.
is a totally different thing.
Oh. Yeah, you bring up something that we're not going to have a lot of time to go into in this conversation, but it's kind of that data piece, right? Because we're operating many times on these optimization projects on just what we're told. Like, we ask the surgeon, we ask the service line lead or the scrub tech, we say, like, what does Dr. Johnson use? And they say, oh, well, they always use this, and they never use that. But we're not actually, sometimes saying, well, show me the data out of the last 100 of these surgeries that they've done, that they've only used this thing, once or twice. It's just kind of their experience or their memory. And, that data piece is really, really important, because that's the verification that we have that, yes, they actually don't use this, or they do use this, or, to your point, if you're making a change, is it actually getting the optimized effect that you want it to? That's the back end. We've made all the changes, made the standardization, and yet they're still calling for pill packs to add into the trays every time they're doing this procedure. Well, obviously, that didn't work the way that we wanted, but you're not going to really know that unless you have the data piece. And, if we have a little bit of time at the end of this, maybe we'll go back in the data, but if not, we'll just put that little carrot out there for a future panel discussion as well. Rebecca, I want to come to you next on the main drivers for this tray optimization piece. We've talked about or kind of alluded to some of them, but what is prompting, or what should be prompting sterile processing departments or OR rooms to even consider this big project, these big kinds of tasks? Like you said, it takes a long time to get trays optimized. What should be driving that?
Time, money, efficiency, staff stress, morale, engagement, extended exposure potentially to bloodborne pathogens. Like, there's so many reasons that tray optimization needs to be a thing that your department does regularly. The biggest thing is the time and, In SPD, we are at the mercy of the OR, but oftentimes our facilities, like, it's very rare to have a facility that has extra inventory for certain services. So we have to be as efficient as possible in order to get those trays turned around for the next case or the next cases later that day. So by doing this, it cuts time in all aspects. And you even have, so with that, I think that you end up having extra time in some capacities to create more of a focus on quality, right? You're not rushing. There's that pressure. Like everyone talks about, attention to detail and making sure things are inspected the right way. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, if you feel pressured and you have an OR that's really in need of stuff ASAP, human error, it's more likely to occur when you feel pressured. So I feel like that's a big factor. If you've got more of the stuff they're going to use in the tray, you're going to cut your time and you'll have more time to worry about quality, I think.
Yeah.
Or focus.
Well, that's another great example of redeployment, right? Like you talked earlier about, hey, we got extra instruments now. If we're optimizing that we can redeploy. Now you're talking about, hey, we got extra time that we can redeploy in ways that add additional value to the trace and to the process. And this piece, it's the quality piece. And Jardine, I want to go to you next. I want to ask a quick follow-up to Rebecca, but I want to go back to you on the quality piece because I know you're all about quality and sterile processing. You got a lot of experience on that topic. But Rebecca, before I go there, you also referenced the impact or the driver of morale. And I know that can seem like a small thing in that big list of things that you talked about, but can you flesh that out a little bit? What would tray optimization, how would that play out into the morale of SPD or the OR or both?
So have you guys ever done a set where you literally, you're missing something and you have to go try to find that instrument and you come back and you realize, oh, this piece is broken. I need to go get another one. I need to go back. I need to go forth. I need sideways.
Never had a tray like that, no.
It's so frustrating because it makes you feel like, man, we can't get it right.
Yeah.
And like you start to feel like you're not doing your job right. And I wish I could just do a tray without having to walk all like a mile around my department. So it creates an environment of frustration. If you can't do your job the right way, or if you don't have the tools to do your job right or complete something, it starts to create a negative space. So being able to be efficient, have less things, and make sure that, having optimization will help with your inventory overall. And so having that creates that positive boost so that you're just eliminating frustration and then also time. So
Jardine, for the quality piece, we've talked about morale, we've talked about kind of efficiency, I guess, a little bit. The time piece obviously is what Rebecca's been going into, but kind of flesh out the quality driver. What does tray optimization have with the end product of quality in these trays that we're optimizing?
Honestly, because there's a reduction of time, because there's a reduction of cost, we just have more overall time to spend giving you quality. It reduces time with instrument testing because there's less instruments that I have to test. And then one of the biggest things that I found is that it gives the technicians more awareness about the critical instruments in this tray. So if I don't have this particular instrument, there is no need to continue processing. Possibly we're not putting this tray out. We won't sterilize it. It's no good to the surgeon. And so it just reduces time and it just brings about a greater awareness for the technician about what is actually essential for this tray. And that just opens up a caveat of awareness. We can alert someone to order this immediately because we don't have this, or we can look for it immediately before the day is over and we'll never see it again.
Yeah. Amanda, Jardine might have set you up for this next question. I don't know. We'll see where you take it from here. But this has been a long kind of introduction in this panel discussion to the missing instrument piece, right? We've been kind of defining our terms, talking about the implications, the what it is, the what it's not, all the teams it impacts, just like Jardine just said, there's an aspect of this that drives the quality piece. And then, like Rebecca said, there's an aspect of this that drives the time piece and the morale piece. But the question is, we're wrapping up an entire conference on missing instruments. What do missing instruments and the challenge they pose have to do with this project and these kinds of things we've been talking about around tray optimization? What's the connection in your mind?
So in my mind, missing instruments means that trays are not done up. So knowing what instruments the surgeon is always going to use, the critical instruments, are going to allow you to A, put that tray up with the missing instrument because it's not critical, and B, allowing you to know that, hey, you need, 6 extras of these on your backup board because they are a critical instrument. They do go missing often, or they break easily, and they are a critical instrument that needs to be in your tray, and you can't put it up without it.
And so, Amanda, it seems like you're kind of making the argument without saying it that part of this tray optimization vision is, yes, getting the right instruments in the tray, getting the wrong instruments out of the tray, but then also internally distinguishing between what is a must-have instrument that can't be missing, to Jardine's point. If it's not there, we're going to keep the tray down. And then those that, hey, they're important, obviously, because this is in an optimized tray. We don't have any instruments in here that are never needed, but they could still do the procedure without this instrument, or maybe there are supplementary instruments in pill pack storage or what have you. But that internal differentiation, I think, is really important to bring up. And I guess maybe now I'll go to Rebecca here. You're in a facility, or you've at least been in facilities that don't have digital tracking as far as count sheets. And when we go into these questions that Jardine and Amanda just brought up of, hey, can this tray be assembled without this instrument? If the instrument's missing, can it go up or do we keep it down? How do you keep track of that without a tracking system?
Excel comes in handy a lot if you don't have the tracking system.
Okay.
So you could have a document for every tray in Excel that lists out like what you are supposed to have, the instrument name, reference number, pictures, all of that. You can just put it in there. And then a lot of the ones that worked at either a picture book or like I said, Excel, they're just adding a comment in there that says this piece is required or a critical instrument. And then coupled with that is like, again, like staff education. So every time we find out that something new or something has changed and this piece like definitely can't be used without that, we do staff education. So again, like just tracking it in that way was most effective. Whereas like if you had a tracking system, you can set an alert or the tray couldn't follow the next steps if it was missing. So for us, that's basically worked out, but it's not ideal. You can't quantify anything really. So
yeah, that education piece was actually going to what of my other question is. It's one thing to kind of notify if it's on the tracking system or if it's on Excel that, hey, we can't do this procedure without this instrument. But then there's a whole other question of why not? And the OR obviously has their reasons why not. But I know for many years in my own sterile processing career, I was just like, okay, this one has to be there. No clue why. Don't know why this is special and this one's not, but these 3 things just have got to be there. Taking that additional step as a team and as educators to say, let me answer those questions, because if you answer it for one tray, that may answer all kinds of other questions for different trays you see that instrument in.
Yep. Get your teams in the operating room. You have to. And if you get pushback, have your OR service lines or educators or leaders come down and like try to use something as an example. Like I had one at a certain facility who came down and he cut a hole in a tray liner and thought like he put a chest spreader in the hole to show us we had problems with the blades getting put on backwards or the handle. So he, just that visual demonstration hits so many people's styles of learning that if you can't be in person and see it live in action, then having that simple visual demonstration really helps resonate with a lot of folks. But get them to the OR. That's all my best advice. So
yeah, that's so important and yet so hard to do in a busy sterile processing department. Like I think most, maybe not most, I think there's a lot of leaders out there that know that's important today and they're bought in, they want to do it. And then when it comes to looking at their staffing schedule and they're like, can I do without Judy today on ortho day with revisions coming down? And if I don't have Judy, then that means Michael's going to be all by himself and Tam.
Well,
and it's just like, it just never happens.
Yep. And the thing is, you have to look at it as investment in quality and production. You know what? Those 3 or 4 hours where Judy is away, guess what? Your leaders should be stepping in on the floor and subbing out. And get your employees up there because you need to, I know that's easier said than done, but you need to invest in your education. You got to do it right and efficiently the first way. And if you do, you're going to see success in so many ways.
Yeah, that call out is important too, beyond the first 90 days. Because when I do see this done, we're going to try to get you up there first 90 days. And then it's like, I hope you remember that for the next 10 years because you ain't never going back to the OR, buddy.
Annually.
Yeah.
Annually.
Yeah. I love that. And it's going to be different for every facility. I completely understand that, but some kind of regular interaction, just like Jardine brought up, these surgeons' practices are changing over time. There's new instruments coming in. There's new ways of doing things. And yeah, if you just remember back in 1987, that one day that you spent in the OR and you're clinging to that, it's a whole nother world. And so I think, if it's annually, if it's every other year, if it's every 6 months, if it's just little like cases here and there, it doesn't have to be the whole day, but that's a hugely important piece of the puzzle for all kinds of things, but specifically to the point about the impact that missing the instruments has on your tray. Because Jardine, there's a difference in getting a phone call down to SPD saying, hey, this tray was missing an instrument. We need another one, to being in the corner of the operating room. The surgeon asked for the instrument. The tech turns around is like, it's not here, doc. That, kind of air sucking out of the room. And maybe no one's looking at the sterile processing tech, but the sterile processing tech's like, I hope no one looks at me because this came from my department. I mean, these missing instruments have a dramatic impact on what's going on in that room.
They do. And, it's one of those things that you have to be there, like you said, to see it and understand it. And once you've seen it and understood it once, I think that'll last your whole life.
It sticks with you. Yeah. Another word that Rebecca used earlier was the word pushback. And I want to ask you about a different type of pushback here. And this is going to what we've been talking about, the differences between those critical instruments, sometimes they're called, that the tray can't be assembled without. And then the non-critical ones that, they're still important many times. But, hey, if you got to do it without it, if it's missing and you can't find it, that's okay. Just like the general trays over time, they tend to get bigger and bigger and bigger with more instruments, more complexity. I feel like there's a temptation for some operating rooms to say, hey, everything's critical. Or almost everything's critical. And so, like, if you give them the option to check off the things that can be missing, they're like, no, nothing. So, how do you deal with that pushback? Obviously, if everything's critical, nothing's critical, it defeats the whole point of this. How have you had those conversations specifically with surgeons or with surgical techs that, are in that camp of they just want everything?
I think a lot of time that is trauma induced, and so we just get into a trauma related state and we don't think, and so the outcome is we need everything all the time. But sometimes I think in a less stressful situation, we try to approach from the perspective of education. I really want my staff to understand what things make this tray have to be put up. What things that are missing, that, what set off alarms so that we have to notify someone to get it ordered. And if you're saying everything is critical, then I won't know that. I won't be able to educate them on that. Can you give me a more specific example of what in this tray is really, really critical? Maybe everything is critical, but what's really, really critical? And maybe sometimes just introducing an educational component can kind of get them to relax just a little bit to come back into the world of logic.
I love that. Yeah. So, Amanda, we've been talking mostly now of the impact that missing instruments have on our drive toward tray optimization. But let me flip that a little and say, okay, what impact does tray optimization have on our headaches around missing instruments? If we're getting more and more optimized tray and inventory, how is that going to change what we're experiencing or what we're seeing on the missing instrument side of things?
So with tray optimization, I think it'll definitely allow you to create more sets because you're going to have extra instrumentation to play with. So it's going to alleviate the headache of constant turnovers. It's going to alleviate the headache of those big trays like Rebecca had talked about, that, there's 200 instruments and you have to very detail oriented, like there's a lot of nooks and crannies, so you have to look for bioburden, and those are the trays that, nobody wants to do. So that obviously helps with morale. But allowing your staff buy-in and helping with morale help your department. I mean, we're all short-staffed.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really helpful. And even your comments again about the impact of this tray optimization leads to more instruments, which then can be deployed or utilized in different areas. But I want to ask something I should have asked earlier when we first brought this up, and I'm going to bring it back to you, Amanda, here first. We talk about tray optimization, and we're kind of using it as the same as tray reduction or instrument reduction. Does it always mean we're going to be taking instruments out of trays? And if not, give me a scenario or two where an optimized tray would actually end up having more instruments in a tray than less.
I would say no, that doesn't always happen with reduction. It's going to be those trays, say your ortho cases, that you use a lot of peel packs. So it's adding those peel packed items to your tray, which then reduces the cost of how many things you're peel packing. And you're able to add them to the tray so that people aren't running around looking for them when the case is actually going on to try and find them because the doctor wants them and he wants them in every case.
Yeah, so I think that's an important takeaway. Then I just wanted to call that out, because I was sitting here thinking like, oh yeah, reduction, and then try to think through the different implications. Even like, if you're combining two trays, so not, just dumping all the instruments from both trays into one tray and call it optimize, but, really saying, hey, we got two trays of 100 instruments. Let's reduce this 200 total instruments down to 120 in one tray and then call it a done deal. and that could still be getting at the optimization piece. 120 may still be a lot of instruments for one tray. I'm not going to fight that battle here, but yeah, that's kind of to get people to think outside the box here, that we're not just asking surgeons and surgical techs to take away. We're actually saying, how can we do this in a way that's going to drive efficiency for you in the OR, and then for our team down in SPD, and all the implications for morale and for cost, et cetera. And we'll talk a little bit about cost here in a second. Rebecca, let's talk about the implication of optimized trays in other areas of SPD and the OR, such as storage. So if we're doing a great job optimizing our trays, what is that going to look like when we come to our sterile storage area, or maybe even our instrument backup wall? Can you speak to any of that from your experience?
Yeah, so you're going to have more room to work with. So like if you're used to like a Zimmer DePuy total knee system being like 7 or 8 trays, and you're able to work with your reps and knock it down to 2 or 3, that's a lot of extra room and wear and tear, and economic wins for everybody. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot more room. You're going to be able to organize more efficiently, and it's safer for your employees too, because they're not having to lift as much. I know we can all speak to being in departments that were way too small for their inventory, and you're having to climb over stuff and sneak around corners, and especially those shelving units that like you have to like pull together and pull apart. Those are the worst.
Hey now, there may be some people who love those things.
I have a love hate. I mean, they're good when they're not totally like weighed down by stuff.
Yeah.
If
they are.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for employee injury. Absolutely. So
with your tray optimization, I mean, you can put some of those heavier trays where you've combined 2 of them into one in a different area, maybe on a stationary shelf, and you can have some of your lighter items like on those compression shelves. It kind of creates a pathway for how to revamp your department based off of, what types of trays you have and your space. You might have less peel packs now, and maybe you can get rid of that bid on that shelf that just collects dust all the time. So there's a lot to think about with that.
Or, I think Amanda kind of alluded to this. You may end up with more peel packs, but less trays, which is still probably a win, right? Because if you've been sitting a tray with 20 instruments up to the OR every day for the last 10 years, and they're using one instrument, it's that favorite little instrument out of there, and we finally stopped and asked, hey, would it be easier to take that one instrument out and just peel pack it? And then you've always got it. We'll add it on a preference card, and you're done. And then those 19 instruments are saved from a ton of testing. Like Jardine mentioned, we never have to test any of those 19 instruments again. We don't have to look at them. We don't have to scrub them. We don't have to do anything, because now they're gone, and in their stead is just an extra pill pack bid, with 5 or 6 of the same instrument. It's completely night and day. Speaking of night and day, Jardine, if you had a magic wand, I'm assuming that this tray optimization question and project would be easy, right? You just wave the wand, maybe you shake the money tree, and all the dollar bills, kind of flutter down to the ground, and you're like, okay, now I can do whatever I want. That's not the world that we live in. So talk to us a little bit about how you manage the mission to optimize trays and to reduce these missing instruments across the inventory, and the cost considerations of this, because I'm assuming these kinds of things cost something, right?
So I would always say, just start with one. If you can get one person to buy in and complete the project, then that would speak to everyone else. Because it wouldn't be, word of mouth is going to begin to take over. And I think that will outweigh in some cases the cost. And depending on if you're dealing with leaders or not, or is it the technicians, hourly versus salary? Maybe we start with salaried employees, so it's not so much of a cost issue. until it takes off. And then once it's been successful, now we're willing to eat the cost of having technicians participate. But usually just starting with one person who can, kind of spearhead this with you, and then saying, hey, these are the analytics. This is the data from what we've done together. How much more would we be able to, save or reduce if more of you guys participated?
That formula that you kind of alluded to, folks are always asking, how much does it cost? Like, what's 1 hour of operating room time, and you're breaking it down into what's 1 hour of your sterile processing manager and your surgical coordinator and your surgical tech and your surgeon sitting in a room around their trays and saying, hey, how can we make this tray more optimized for you? And that is going to have a cost, an upfront cost, because of the staffing, the labor piece. But then there's all that efficiency, that saving on the back end that's just scaled out for as long as that tray is going to be used, from now until the end of time. And that's a lot of time saving. All those minutes add up every surgery, every day, with every different surgeon that's happened to use that tray. So I think that's a very powerful piece of the puzzle, but your insight too, your recommendation, I guess, to, hey, start small with maybe one service line and one trusted surgeon, maybe one that's a little bit more friendly toward SPD, trying to make some changes and some improvements, and then use that as the example to kind of show other service lines of, hey, if Dr. Wanda can do this, then it could work for robotics as well, and it could work, for maxillofacial. So I think that's a great takeaway. What do you think, Amanda? Is there a cost? We talked a little bit about the staffing cost, Jardine just kind of mentioned the time cost. What other cost or, pushback around cost have you experienced in some of your tray optimization projects or conversations?
Or you're going to have the opportunity to create more trays. So with more trays comes more containers, more pieces that you're going to need. So if you don't containerize and you wrap, biologicals, indicators, peel packs, if you're going to add more peel packs, and then obviously extra instrumentation. Say you have 95% of this tray done, but you need those extra couple instruments, you're going to have to order more instruments.
So there's a consumable cost. There's, I guess, not necessarily, capital could be capital if you're buying, some of the containers at a large scale, if you're buying some new storage systems. But, it's important to call that out because you're right. We may be optimizing the complexity of our tray inventory down to, instead of 3 trays that are usable, now we got 6 trays that are usable. But, that could have implications on different trays and storage and containment devices. But to Rebecca's point earlier, that would mean instead of every day when we have 3 trays and we have 5 cases, we're scrambling for that 4th turnover and that 5th turnover to get those trays back in action. Now we've got enough trays where everyone gets their tray sterilized and packaged and ready to go ahead of time. And then we've got an extra 1 or 2 in case of add-ons and emergencies. But every time that you can take that turnover pressure out of SPD, there's sometimes you just can't help the turnover pressure, right, Rebecca? Like there's holes in trays, there's issues like unforeseen situations that you just did not realize and could never plan for. And if you've got guaranteed every single day turnover situations because you just don't have the amount of inventory that you need for the volume that you're processing, the system's not ready for those little one-off things that we're not planned for. And I got to think this optimization conversation is a key to solving that.
Can I chime in with something real quick?
Yeah.
So, Amanda's comment made me think of something. So, a team member, I was discussing this stuff with my team just to get their heads thinking about this and see what they thought. And so Standardization, somebody brought up, it's not just your stuff. Like if you have multiple campuses, it could be standardizing the trays across your network, or having a community, like a network community where you are saying, hey, we do this. Do you do this? And like kind of fielding the rest of your hospital network for details if, you can't do it across a policy or, across your facilities. But when she was talking about the supplies, like somebody brought up, again, the use of tray liners. Are you using them or are you not? There's still plenty of facilities that don't use them. And, that's another big factor for missing instruments, because a lot of instruments get damaged, getting stuck in those wire baskets, and they're going out for repair. So again, like that's another cost, and corner protectors and all of that. But it made me think of like standardizing across your system as a bigger goal, and then there'll be cost savings overall eventually.
Yeah, within the system, I think is really important, and that applies to what I'm about to say too. But I was in a facility down in San Antonio. We were the university hospital that was actually connected by pedway to the VA hospital. So completely different hospital systems, no relation whatsoever, except for we had what was called a memorandum of understanding that if anything ever hit the fan, we were willing and able to sterilize trays in various facilities and, transport trays across facilities. But their major instrument tray was not standardized to our major instrument tray. So, yeah, we could share trays if we needed to. But if we would have, there would have been some issues around what those trays look like. And, of course, the optimization piece is inherent to that conversation. So I would maybe even challenge our industry. We're still trying to optimize across our systems and standardize like in our little families of hospitals. But also, hey, if you got folks in your area that you've got a memorandum of understanding with, and that you're constantly calling, even if it's for supplies, if you run out of tray liners, and hey, y'all got any of those tray liners over there that you could share? It only helps us if we're standardized. We're all using the same tray liners. We're all using the same major trays. I know that, sounds like a pipe dream out there, but I think if we talked enough and collaborated enough, even at the chapter level, we could get there with some intentionality. So I'll let people kind of think about that on their own. So we've got about 7 minutes or so left in this conversation. Time always flies when we're talking to great panels like you guys. But I want to wrap here with a couple of important questions here. And I'm going to start here first with Jardine. We've said a lot about optimized trays here. And I want to ask maybe a question that folks have already been thinking about, or maybe one that's kind of from left field. Are we saying that better optimized trays would lead to fewer instruments that are missing? Is that our claim and our argument, or are we not saying that, Jardine? Are we saying something else? What's your perspective on that question?
I thought about this, and I think we are not saying that. We are saying that This is an opportunity for education. We are saying that this is an opportunity for efficiency, and it's a opportunity to just update, everything that we do as a community. I think it's not necessarily saying things won't get lost, but when they get lost, we'll know their importance, and we'll know their worth and value to those trays. And then we're ultimately saying that less will be lost, because hopefully less will be involved in these trays. Or, the opposite is true as well for adding instruments. So I don't think we're necessarily saying that things won't be lost, but it is an opportunity for us to grow overall.
Okay. I really like that insight of, hey, if it is lost in this scenario, it's going to kind of be a bigger deal maybe than if it's lost and these trays are not optimized to begin with. So that's a great point. What do you think, Amanda? Are we saying this is going to help your missing instrument challenge, or are we saying, hey, there's some implications, like Jordan said, but at the end of the day, this is not necessarily going to solve it for you?
I agree with Jordan. I would say that we're more or less trying to say that less is not always more in this case, and that um, we are just giving ideas and possible recommendations to take back to your facilities, and um, maybe you can put a process or a procedure in place for when you need to order a missing instrument, or when you need to know what instruments are critical. Just having those processes and procedures in place so that it's not always so stressful. Because that's half the problem, is when you are missing a critical instrument, things get stressful because then you can't put that tray up.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier, Amanda, too, that as these trays become more and more optimized, you learn which replacement instruments you need more of. So there's not just one hanging on the pegboard and you're like, hopefully that's enough. But you're like, no, we know this is critical. We know this is a high volume tray. And we know that now we know that we need to order more potential replacements for that, so that in those stressful situations, even though it's going to slow you down assembling the tray, if you go to the backup area, chances are real good that you're going to find what you need there. And that's a really encouraging place to be as a technician that wants to do a good job. So, Rebecca, I'm going to give you the last word. Are you going to agree with our two panelists here that tray optimization not necessarily going to solve, but it's going to get some structure and some process to this missing instrument challenge, or are you going to take a different perspective?
A little bit of both.
Okay. Why am I not surprised?
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so I agree. It's not going to fix everything, but you're leaning into lean, right? So everything is, my facility I'm at now is part of your onboarding and your orientation actually is a white belt, a lean white belt class for all new hires in the organization. So right off the rip, you are taught like, hey, these are some qualities to think about. And so you're leading into lean, you're making your workflow more efficient, less waste, all of that stuff. So I agree. It's not going to solve everything, but if your minds get going about it, in that capacity, and you start to realize like how tight everything can be and how much time and space you're saving, you're going to start thinking about all of your processes that way. So it's going to be a trigger effect. But my big point that I want to make is you need to start it from the very beginning with your new hires. You need to get that education in place, and you have to have specific procedures and standard operating procedures or a checklist, and it needs to be drilled into your text of what to do every single time an instrument is missing. We've all been in departments where things need to go out for a repair, and then nobody marks, or a tray is marked as missing, but nobody else is informed, hey, this critical instrument or this piece is missing, and then they go to open the tray, the OR, and they can't use it. So you have to start with education first with your new hires, and even for your seasoned techs. Make a competency annually. How do you do this? If this is missing something, or if something's going out for repair, write it out, standard operating procedure, get it done.
Right. Well,
education.
Yeah. That standard operating procedure too can even be applied to how you optimize a tray. That's kind of what the last hour has been that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
What's the process for that? And handing that off even to your brand new technicians, even if they're not the ones physically going through that process, they're the ones that's receiving this optimized tray, and that's going to help you to continue that efficiency that hopefully we've bought in the process. Tremendous conversation today, y'all. I did not know what to expect. This was kind of an interesting angle on this topic of missing instruments to talk at it through tray optimization, but really helpful. I can tell all three of y'all have an educational spirit about you, even though you may not have education in your job title. And, that's what these kind of conferences and conversations are all about, to share what you've learned and to get people thinking. I think you said that, Rebecca, is just to spark that critical thinking of, this may not be the silver bullet, but if you start thinking about these things, it's going to cause those dominoes to start falling all kinds of different directions. You're going to start talking to your surgeons, like Jardin said. You're going to start looking at your backup inventory and asking questions of, hey, can we scale this across the system? And all of those things will get you closer to that goal of having 100% instruments in your tray used 100% of the time, and having 100% of the instruments not used 100% of the time out of your tray and deployed somewhere else. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and hand it back over to our host. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this Lost in Space conference and this session on tray optimization. And like we tell you all the time here at Beyond Clean, keep fighting dirty.